In the year 1891, I, Silas Weatherford, aged 24, traveled to the northern coast of Oregon as part of a reconnaissance party for the Oregon Timber and Mill Company. Our task was to survey the coastal cliffs between Cannon Beach and Arch Cape for the construction of a new sawmill. The company was expanding its business. The cedar forests of these places promised good profits, and I, a young assistant geologist, was eager to prove my worth. At the time, it seemed to me that a routine expedition lay ahead. I did not know then that some places hold more than just trees and rocks. There were 7 of us. Thomas J. Carleton, the company's senior engineer, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a habit of constantly checking his pocket compass, led the group. He had traveled halfway across the state, marking out areas for logging, and his experience inspired confidence. James McCreary, whom everyone called Jim, was a master carpenter with 15 years of experience working in sawmills. His hands, covered with scars from saws and splinters, knew wood better than any textbook. Broad-shouldered, with a thick red beard, Jim could determine the quality of a log at a glance and build a barn in a day. Andrew Holmes, a geologist from the East Coast, had arrived in Oregon just 3 months earlier. He wore wire-rimmed glasses, constantly took notes in a leather notebook, and spoke with a slight Boston accent. Peter Swenson, our guide, was a local of Swedish descent. He was born here and knew every trail, every stream, every crevice in the rocks. Short, wiry, and weather-beaten, Peter could walk all day without rest and find his way even in the thickest fog. Robert Turner, whom everyone called Bob, was in charge of equipment and provisions. He was a quiet man, a former storekeeper who recorded every can of corned beef and every pound of flour in his worn notebook. And then there was Will Harrison, a 16-year-old boy, the son of one of the company directors, sent on the expedition to gain experience. Thin, with tousled straw-colored hair, Will looked at everything with wide eyes and asked endless questions. We arrived at Cannon Beach on October 23, 1891, at dawn, when the fog had not yet lifted from the ocean. The town was tiny. A few wooden houses, a tavern, a general store, and a pier from which fishermen set out to sea. The air smelled of salt, seaweed, and fresh wood. Stacks of logs stretched along the shore waiting to be loaded. We rented rooms above the tavern owned by Mrs. Margaret Dearborn, an elderly widow with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a sharp, inquiring gaze. On our first evening, as we sat in her establishment by the light of oil lamps, eating stewed lamb and potatoes, Mrs. Dearborn brought us mugs of ale. Thomas spread out the maps on the table, showing us the route for the next day. We were to walk north along the coast to the old Hanson sawmill, which had closed several years ago, survey the cliffs, and find a suitable site for a new building. Mrs. Dearborn stood nearby, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was impassive, but when Thomas said the name, Hanson's Mill, she turned pale. "Don't go there after dark," she said quietly, almost in a whisper, glancing around the empty hall. "Ole still wanders there, wrapped in his death. The fog brings him with it." Thomas smiled politely, but Mrs. Dearborn did not smile back. She leaned closer, and I could smell the lavender from her dress. "If you hear a knock, run without looking back. He's looking for those who came to take his forest." She straightened up, crossed herself, and quickly returned to the kitchen without waiting for a response. Bob snorted. Andrew shook his head and smiled. Even Peter, usually serious, shrugged. "Old tales," he muttered. "Every forest has its ghost." We didn't think much of it. How wrong we were. The next morning, October 24th, we set out. Fog rose from the ocean like a thick gray wall, enveloping the trees, the rocks, the sky itself. Visibility was no more than 10 to 15 feet in any direction. The sound of the surf came from the right, a dull, rhythmic roar of waves crashing against the rocks, drowning out all other noises. We walked in single file. Peter in front, followed by Thomas, then me, Andrew, Jim, Bob, and Will bringing up the rear. Each of us carried a backpack with provisions, tools, and camping gear. The trail led through a dense coniferous forest. Firs, cedars, and giant sequoias towered around us like ghosts in the fog. The ground was covered with fallen pine needles, damp from the drizzling rain. The air was cold and damp, penetrating our clothing. At times, the trail came to the edge of a cliff, and then a precipice opened up on the right, below which the invisible ocean roared. White surf foam flashed in the gaps in the fog, then disappeared again. The first 2 days passed quietly. We surveyed the northern part of the coast, took measurements, and Thomas and Andrew recorded data on soil composition and rock stability. Jim studied the trees, estimating the volume of wood. In the evenings, we set up camp in small clearings, built a fire, ate salted meat and beans, and warmed ourselves by the fire. Will asked questions about logging, saw mechanisms, and how to choose a place for construction. Jim answered patiently, sometimes demonstrating something with branches. On October 26th, on the third day, we reached the ruins of the old Hanson Mill. It stood on the edge of a cliff, half collapsed, with beams sticking out and a crooked roof. Fog enveloped it, making it look like a giant skeleton. A massive rusty circular disc, more than twice the height of a man in diameter, still hung above a log table covered with dark stains that could have been anything. Oil, resin, blood. The floor was littered with years of sawdust mixed with dirt and small stones. Among the sawdust, I noticed bones, small ones from birds or rats, bleached white by time. We carefully walked around the building, examining the foundation. Thomas took notes. Andrew tapped the beams, checking their strength. I held the measuring tape, helping with the measurements. That's when Will shouted, "Hey, look!" We turned around. The boy was standing at the edge of the forest, pointing at the trees. Long strips of fabric hung from the branches of a low-growing cedar tree, 20 feet from the mill. We moved closer. They were bandages, dirty gauze stained in places with brown, dried blood. The strips hung at different heights, some dangling almost to the ground, others wrapped around branches. The fabric was old and torn, but not rotten. There was no wind. The fog was still, but the bandages swayed slightly, as if someone had recently disturbed them. "What the hell?" Bob muttered. Jim walked over and carefully touched one of the strips. His face darkened. "The blood is old, but not that old. A month, maybe 2? He turned to Peter. "Do you know what this is?" Peter was silent, staring at the bandages. His weathered face was impassive, but I noticed him swallow. "I've heard," he said finally. "The locals say they find this sometimes, in the fall, when the fog is thick." "Sounds like superstition," Andrew remarked, but his voice sounded uncertain. Thomas ordered us to continue the search. We moved on, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone became more cautious, looking around more often. Will walked silently, no longer asking questions. Half an hour later, as we were walking around the east side of the mill, where the path descended into a small ravine, Jim stopped so abruptly that I almost bumped into him. "Jesus Christ," he gasped. There were footprints on the muddy trail right in front of us. Barefoot human footprints, huge ones. I knelt down next to one of them, studying it. The footprint was fresh. The edges were clear, not blurred by rain. The shape of the foot was strange. The toes were spread unnaturally wide, as if someone had forced them apart. The length of the footprint was about 1.5 times the length of my boot. The width was disproportionate. The front was wide, the heel narrow. But the strangest thing was that each footprint was surrounded by a scattering of wood shavings. Fresh cedar shavings, light in color and smelling of resin. And between the shavings were drops, dark and thick. "It's blood," Jim said quietly. Andrew took off his backpack, took out a notebook, and began to sketch the footprint. His hand was shaking. Thomas stood silently, looking along the trail where the footprints disappeared into the fog. I reached out, placed my palm next to the footprint, comparing the size. My hand was average, nothing special. I covered the footprint completely, from heel to fingertips. My palm didn't even cover half of it. The footprint was 3 times larger. "A bear?" Will suggested quietly. Peter shook his head. "Bears have claws." "There are no claws here." He crouched down, studying the footprint more closely. "And the shape is wrong. It's a human, or something that used to be human." We stood silently, listening to the fog. The surf roared below, hidden by a white veil. Somewhere a crow cawed, the sound echoing between the trees. Before we continue, please write in the comments. Have you ever encountered something inexplicable in the forest? Your opinion is important to us. The tracks led north, deep into the forest, away from the mill. Thomas decided to follow them to determine what had left them. I could see him trying to maintain a professional calm, but his hand involuntarily checked the revolver on his belt. We moved slowly, following the chain of footprints. The trail was intermittent. Sometimes the footprints were in a row, step by step. Then they disappeared for several dozen feet, then reappeared. Sawdust and drops of blood were everywhere. In some places, I bent down to get a better look. The blood was fresh, not yet completely dry, leaving wet smears on my fingers. "It was recent," Jim said, looking at me. "This morning, maybe a couple of hours ago." We came to a small clearing where the ground was softer, covered with moss. Here, the tracks became clearer. I saw that one foot left a deeper impression than the other. The creature was limping. The left foot's stride was shorter. Next to some of the tracks were strange furrows, as if someone had been dragging something heavy across the ground. At the edge of the clearing, between two fir trees, bandages hung. Dozens of meters of blood-stained gauze hung between the trunks like a giant spider web. Some pieces were dry, brown from old blood. Others were wet, scarlet, smelling of something pungent. Carbolic acid, used for disinfection in hospitals. I had seen it when my father broke his arm and the doctor treated the wound. It was the same smell. Andrew came closer and carefully touched one of the strips. The fabric was thick, multi-layered, and in places stuck together with dried blood. "These are medical bandages," he whispered. "They're used to wrap wounds. Serious wounds." Bob walked around the fir trees and looked behind them. "My God, they're everywhere." He was right. Bandages hung everywhere. On branches, on bushes, some lying on the ground, twisted into dirty balls. It looked as if someone had methodically hung them up, decorating the forest with bloody flags. I picked up a piece from the ground. The fabric was cold and damp. The smell was so strong that I almost threw up. Rotting flesh mixed with carbolic acid and something else sweet and nauseating. I threw the bandage away and wiped my hand on my pants, but the smell had penetrated my skin. "We have to keep going," Thomas said. His voice was tense. "Find out what this is." We continued on our way. The tracks led deeper into the forest, away from the coast. The fog was thickening. Visibility was reduced to a few feet. The trees became ghosts, appearing and disappearing. The sound of the surf became distant, muffled. An hour later, we came to the base of a cliff where the rocks rose up, hidden by the fog. At the foot of the cliff, among the rocks and bushes, we found tools. Rusty saw blades, varying in size from a plate to a cartwheel. Hooks with long handles for hooking logs. Axes with broken handles. Everything was covered with a crust of rust and dried blood. Lots of blood. Dark brown, almost black. Jim picked up one of the hooks and turned it over in his hands. "These are lumberjack tools," he said. "Mill tools." He looked up at us. "But they weren't here yesterday." "Peter, did you come through here yesterday?" Peter nodded. "Yes, I was checking the trail. There was nothing here. So someone brought them here during the night," Andrew said. "Why?" Will asked. The boy's voice trembled. No one answered. Thomas ordered us to take a break. We took off our backpacks, got out our water bottles and some salted meat. We ate in silence. Fog surrounded us on all sides, damp, cold, penetrating. I could feel the dampness creeping under my shirt, under my skin. Sounds were muffled. Even our chewing seemed distant. And then we heard it. A heavy, limping shuffle, distant but distinct. The sound of bare feet dragging across rocks. One step, a pause. Another step, shorter than the first, a pause. Then a metallic clank, as if someone were dragging chains or an iron object across the rocks. Everyone froze. Jim slowly lowered his flask. Bob stopped chewing. Will turned pale, his eyes widened. The sound continued. Shuffling, pause, clank. Rhythmic, methodical. Between the steps, there was a wet, sniffling, gurgling sound, as if breath was passing through liquid. The sound was getting closer. Thomas raised his hand, signaling us to be quiet. We sat motionless, listening. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was afraid it would be heard. The shuffling passed us on the right, about 10 feet away. The fog was so thick that we couldn't see anything but a white wall. The sound moved slowly, as if someone was cautiously exploring the area, knowing we were there. Then it stopped. The silence was deafening. Even the surf seemed to have died down. I could hear only my own breathing, rapid and uneven. And the breathing of the others, quiet, restrained. We waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Then the shuffling resumed, receding. The clanking of metal grew fainter. After a few minutes, the sounds disappeared completely, dissolving into the fog. Thomas exhaled. What the hell was that? No one answered. We sat staring into the fog, trying to see what was hidden there. Peter spoke first. "We're not alone here." His voice was quiet but firm. "And whatever is out there knows we're here." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fog. Something fundamental in those words made my stomach clench. We were intruders on foreign territory. Thomas decided to move on to the top of the cliff, where, according to the map, there should be a platform suitable for a lookout point. From there, we could see the entire coastline and assess the scale of the forest. We gathered our equipment and set off. The climb was steep. The path wound between the rocks, zigzagging upward. The fog grew even thicker. At times, I couldn't see Andrew walking ahead of me at arm's length. We moved slowly, holding onto branches and rocks, helping each other. When we reached the top, the sun was already setting. Although through the fog, this was only visible by a slight darkening of the white veil. Thomas ordered us to set up camp. The clearing was small, surrounded by pine trees with one side overlooking the edge of the cliff. We cleared the area and gathered dry brushwood for a fire. Jim started a fire using flint and tinder. The flames flared up, greedily consuming the brushwood, and we gathered around, warming our hands. Bob took out the provisions and began to prepare dinner. Stewed beans with salted pork, heated in a pot over the fire. The smell of food mingled with the smoke. We ate in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Will sat next to me, his face pale, his eyes restless. "Mr. Weatherford," he whispered, "what do you think about these tracks?" I didn't know what to say. "I don't know, Will. Maybe someone local. A hermit. With feet like that?" The boy shook his head. "And those bandages. It's not normal." I couldn't disagree with him. After dinner, Thomas assigned watch duties. We didn't say it out loud, but we all understood. Someone had to keep watch at night. Thomas and Jim took the first shift. Peter and I took the second. Andrew and Bob took the third. Will was allowed to sleep through the night. He was the youngest. We laid out our sleeping bags around the fire. I lay down, pulling the blanket up to my chin, but sleep would not come. I lay there, watching the dancing flames, listening to the crackling of the burning branches. Fog surrounded our camp on all sides, an impenetrable wall. Beyond it was only darkness. Maybe an hour passed. I was almost asleep when the fire suddenly crackled louder. I opened my eyes. Thomas and Jim were sitting by the fire, both staring into the fog. Their faces were tense. "Did you hear that?" Thomas whispered. Jim nodded. I propped myself up on my elbow. "What?" Thomas turned around. "Shuffling. Over there in the woods." We listened. I strained my ears, trying to catch any sound. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then I heard it. Shuffling. Close. 20, maybe 30 feet from the camp. The same sound. Bare feet dragging over rocks. A limp, a metallic clank. A wet gurgle with each breath. The others woke up. Peter sat up and grabbed his rifle. Andrew froze, staring into the fog. Bob slowly got up, holding onto his axe. Even Will woke up, sat up, and looked around fearfully. The sound moved around the camp. It circled us. Slowly, methodically. I saw Jim take his revolver and cock it. Thomas took out his weapon too. The shuffling stopped right in front of us, behind the wall of fog, where the light from the fire barely penetrated the white veil. We sat motionless, weapons at the ready, staring into the darkness. And then we saw a silhouette. Tall, very tall, over 6 feet, stooped, massive. It stood motionless in the fog, 30 feet away from us. The light from the fire barely reached it, turning the figure into a blurry spot. But I could see the shape, human but distorted. The figure slowly tilted its head to one side. I heard a crack, dry, distinct, like a branch breaking. A wet, wheezing breath came from the fog. Deep, gurgling, intermittent. I saw something dark running down the figure, dripping onto the ground. No one fired. We sat with our weapons raised, fingers on the triggers, but no one pulled the trigger. There was something about this creature, something primal, paralyzing. Not animal fear, something deeper. An instinctive understanding that what we were facing was something wrong, something that violated the laws of nature. The figure stood there. It looked at us. I couldn't make out any details. The fog and darkness hid them. But I could feel its gaze, studying, assessing, waiting. The silence dragged on. The crackling of the fire seemed deafening. I didn't breathe. My lungs burned, but I couldn't inhale, afraid that the sound would attract attention. Then the figure began to move. Suddenly, without warning, it limped toward us. The shuffling became faster. The metallic clanking grew louder. A muffled groan escaped from the fog, passing through a decayed throat. The gurgling mixed with a wheeze. "Shoot!" Thomas shouted. But the creature did not approach. It circled the camp to the right, swiftly, a dozen feet away from us, and disappeared into the fog. The shuffling receded, grew quieter, dissolved. We sat with our weapons still raised, our hands shaking. I could hear the others breathing heavily. Will was crying quietly, his face buried in his knees. Jim slowly lowered his revolver. His face was glistening with sweat. What in the world was that? No one answered. We didn't know. How could we know? We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We all sat around the fire, adding wood to keep the flames going. We kept our weapons at the ready. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the cry of a night bird, made us jump. My body was tense to the limit. My muscles ached. My jaws hurt from clenching my teeth. My hands shook as I held my rifle. I felt cold sweat on my back and under my arms. My mouth was dry, but I couldn't drink. My throat wouldn't let the water through. Dawn came slowly, seeping through the fog with a gray light. When it was light enough to see, Thomas ordered us to get ready. We gathered our gear silently, quickly. Everyone wanted to leave. But before we left, Peter walked around the camp, checking the perimeter. He returned with a pale face. "Footprints," he said, "everywhere. It's been walking around us all night." We went to look. Barefoot tracks of enormous feet surrounded our camp in a perfect circle. In some places, they repeated themselves. The creature had stopped, stood, and continued on. Next to each track was a scattering of wood shavings and drops of blood, fresh blood that had not yet dried in the morning air. "It was studying us," Andrew whispered. "All night long, just studying." Thomas ordered them to return to the mill and then to Cannon Beach. The expedition was over, but Andrew objected. He took out his notebook and showed his notes. "We're almost done with the survey. There's one last section left, the east side of the cliff. If we leave now, all our work will be for nothing." Thomas hesitated. I could see the struggle on his face, professional duty versus self-preservation. "One day," Andrew said, "we'll finish the measurements and leave tomorrow morning." In the end, Thomas agreed. We moved to the eastern side of the cliff. The day passed in tense silence. We took measurements and recorded data, but we kept looking over our shoulders. The fog did not dissipate. It enveloped the forest in a thick veil, obscuring everything beyond 10 feet. At times, I heard shuffling in the distance, but when I listened, there was nothing. By evening, we returned to the ruins of the mill. Thomas ordered us to set up camp here. At least we had walls, even if they were half collapsed. We occupied the most intact part of the building, where the roof was still intact. We built a fire inside, on the old stone hearth. Smoke rose through the holes in the roof. We had salted meat and crackers for dinner. Bob made coffee in a kettle. The hot drink warmed us up a little from the inside. We sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets. "What did Mrs. Dearborn say about this place?" Jim asked suddenly. Thomas answered reluctantly. "About Ole. The wrapped one. She said he wanders around here." "Ole Hansen," said Peter. "The owner of this mill. He died about 5 years ago. An accident. He got caught in a circular saw. They tried to save him, wrapped him in bandages, took him to Portland, but he died on the way from blood loss." Silence. "It was his dream," Peter continued. "He built this mill over 10 years. He cut the trees himself, installed the machinery himself. He lived here alone, in a cabin by the forest. The locals thought he was strange, but he was a good man, just obsessed. It was his forest, his life, and he can't let go," Will whispered. No one disagreed. The night was worse than the previous one. We heard shuffling early, shortly after sunset. It was approaching slowly. We sat inside the mill by the fire, weapons in hand. The sound circled the building. It stopped at the doorway. Heavy, wet breathing came from the darkness. I saw a silhouette in the doorway. Tall, massive, motionless. The light from the fire illuminated it partially. I could make out the shape, human, but wrapped up. The whole body was covered in bandages, layers of gauze, dark with blood. The figure stood there. It looked at us. Its head turned slowly, examining each of us. I heard a crunch. Tendons, bones, something in its neck breaking as it moved. A dark liquid oozed from under the bandages on its face. It ran down its chest, dripping onto the floor of the mill. I heard the sound of the drops, soft, rhythmic, nauseating. The creature's left arm was chopped off below the elbow. The stump was carelessly bandaged, the bandages soaked with blood, fresh and old. I saw the liquid seeping through the fabric. The creature took a step inside. Its bare foot left a wet mark on the stone floor. Its toes were spread unnaturally wide. There were no nails. Thomas raised his revolver. "Stop! One more step and I'll shoot." The figure froze. Its head tilted to one side and the crunching sound repeated. A wet, gurgling sound escaped from under the bandages where the mouth should have been. Not words. A sound passed through a decayed throat. Then the creature slowly backed away, one step back. Another? It receded into the fog and disappeared. The shuffling sound faded away. "It's playing with us," Jim said quietly. Not attacking, just watching. Peter nodded, assessing, deciding. Deciding what? Will asked. Whether we are worthy, Peter replied. We didn't sleep all night. On the morning of October 28th, Thomas announced that we were leaving. Immediately. To hell with the measurements. To hell with the expedition. We gathered our things, put out the fire, and left the mill. But Andrew was gone. We called his name. We searched the building. His backpack was by the fire, but Andrew himself was nowhere to be found. Peter found footprints, human footprints, leading from the mill to the edge of the cliff. We followed the tracks. The fog was thick, visibility was poor. The tracks led to an old log dump where Hansen once used to send timber down to the sea. A narrow platform on the edge of the cliff, surrounded by broken beams. Andrew was lying there. He was lying on his back, arms outstretched. His entire body was wrapped in bloody bandages. Layers and layers of blood-soaked gauze covered his torso, legs, and arms. His face was exposed. His eyes were bulging, his mouth open in a silent scream. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle. There were marks on his face, bare feet, huge with splayed toes, covered in wood shavings. The creature had stepped on his face. Next to the body lay a rusty circular saw blade. The blade was covered in dried blood. Will screamed. Bob fell to his knees and vomited. I stood unable to move, staring at my dead friend. Jim came over and checked his pulse. He shook his head. Dead. Broken neck. Several hours ago. We should have heard it, Thomas whispered. Why didn't we hear it? But I knew why. The surf drowned out the sounds. The fog swallowed the cries. We slept, exhausted, and Andrew went out alone. Maybe he woke up, couldn't sleep, decided to take a walk, and the creature was waiting. We couldn't carry the body. It was a long way, and Andrew was heavy. Thomas decided we would come back with help from town. We covered the body with Bob's jacket and piled rocks around it to keep animals away. As we were about to leave, I heard a sound, a shuffling, close by. I turned around. The creature was standing at the edge of the clearing, 20 feet away from us. In the daylight, through the fog, I could see it clearly for the first time. About 6 feet 2 inches tall. Massive build, broad shoulders, muscular arms of a laborer. Its entire body, from head to toe, was wrapped in layers of dirty gauze and linen bandages. In places, the fabric was soaked with old blood, forming dark crusts. In other places, the blood was fresh, scarlet, wet, dripping down the bandages. The bandages on his chest and back are thicker, multi-layered, as if someone had tried to stop massive bleeding. His left arm is chopped off below the elbow. The stump is carelessly wrapped, constantly oozing a dark liquid that drips onto the ground. The head is completely wrapped, but the fabric is rotten and has fallen away in places. The outline of the skull is visible through the holes. The eye sockets are sunken, moist, and dark. Something flickers in them. Not light, but a reflection, like that of an animal in the dark. A murky, sickly glow. The mouth is a torn hole in the bandages. A dark liquid mixed with saliva flows from it, dripping down the chin. When the creature breathes, the liquid gurgles, escaping in gasps. The skin beneath the loose bandages is blackened and covered with spots of decay. In places, burns from carbolic acid are visible, leaving white scars on the dead flesh. The feet are bare. The feet are huge, 3 times larger than normal. The toes are spread unnaturally wide, as if someone had forcibly spread them apart and fixed them in place. There are no nails, and the tips of the toes are dark and blackened. Wood shavings, fresh cedar shavings, are stuck to the bandages all over the body, forming a crust. They are mixed with blood and dirt, creating a disgusting texture. The creature moves with a limp. Its left leg drags, its foot scraping against the stones. Each step is an effort, painful and slow. But there is something purposeful and methodical about its movements. The smell coming from it is unbearable. A mixture of morgue formaldehyde, rotting flesh, carbolic acid, and freshly cut cedar. Sweetish, suffocating, penetrating the lungs, sticking in the throat. A trail stretches behind the creature. Pieces of bandages break off and fall to the ground. Drops of blood mixed with sawdust leave a trail. Some bandages flutter even though there is no wind. The creature is holding something in its right hand. I looked closely. A rusty hook, long with a curved end for hooking logs. Knuckles wrapped in bandages grip the handle. The creature stood there looking at us. Its head slowly turned, studying each of us. I heard wet breathing, gurgling in its throat, crunching as it moved. Thomas raised his revolver. Peter raised his rifle. Jim took his axe. We stood with our weapons ready, waiting for an attack. But the creature did not attack. It watched. At Andrew. At us. Back at Andrew. As if comparing, evaluating. Then its head turned to me. Our eyes met. I looked into the sunken eye sockets, into the cloudy glow, into the emptiness where human eyes once were. And I understood. It was Ole Hansen, the worker who built the dream, who died, caught in a saw, bleeding to death, wrapped in gauze that couldn't save him, who died without finishing his work, who came back. The creature slowly retreated, one step back, dragging its leg. Another step, it moved to the edge of the cliff where the rock broke off over the sea. It stopped at the very edge. The fog began to dissipate. For the first time in days, we saw the sun, pale, low, breaking through the clouds. A ray of light touched the creature. It raised its head. A sound escaped from its throat. A long, mournful howl. Not human. Similar to the howl of a circular saw cutting into wood. Prolonged, full of pain, endless. The bandages on its body began to flutter, to tear away. Long, blood-stained strips of gauze rose into the air, even though there was no wind. They swirled around the creature, flying away, falling into the sea. The creature stood with its arms outstretched and its head thrown back. The bandages continued to tear away, layer by layer, exposing the blackened flesh beneath. The skin smoked in the sun as if it were burning. When the last ray of sunlight pierced the fog, the creature took a step back, one step over the edge of the cliff. It disappeared. We rushed to the edge. We looked down. Fog enveloped the base of the cliff. Sharp rocks protruded from the white veil. The surf roared as it crashed against the rocks. We didn't hear the sound of a fall. Only the surf, only the wind. Peter climbed down the narrow path to the base of the cliff. He returned an hour later. He found nothing. No body, no traces. Only a single bloody strip of bandage caught on a sharp rock fluttering in the wind. We returned to Cannon Beach on the evening of October 28th. Mrs. Dearborn greeted us silently. She looked at our faces and crossed herself. We told the sheriff about Andrew's death. He organized a group to retrieve the body. The next day, I sat in the room above the tavern, looking out the window at the ocean. The fog was rising again. I was writing a report for the company. I tried to describe what we had seen, but when I finished and reread what I had written, I realized that no one would believe it. It sounded like delirium, hallucination, mass hysteria. I sent the report to Portland. A week later, I received a reply. The Oregon Timber and Mill Company management edited the document. They removed everything about the creature, the tracks, the bandages. They left only accident involving Andrew Holmes, fall from a cliff, adverse weather conditions. Project closed. The area is geologically unstable. When I tried to insist, I met with the manager and told him everything. He looked at me for a long time and said, "Mr. Weatherford, you are young and have prospects in our company. Don't ruin your reputation with ghost stories. It will harm not only you, but everyone who was with you." I understood. Silence was the price of my career. The local newspaper, the Cannon Beach Gazette, published a brief note. Tragic death of a worker who fell from a cliff during geological exploration. Andrew Holmes, 32, a geologist from Boston, was buried in the local cemetery. Oregon Timber and Mill expresses its condolences to the family. No one mentioned the rest. The team's testimony was recorded as mass hallucination due to fatigue and fog. The doctor who examined us diagnosed nervous exhaustion and prescribed rest. I went to see Mrs. Dearborn before leaving. She was sitting on the porch of the tavern, looking out at the ocean. "You saw it," she said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. "I told you?" But no one listens until the shrouded one takes his. "Why did he kill Andrew? Why not the others?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe Andrew was the first one he got his hands on. Maybe Ole was just showing what he could do, that the forest was his, that he was waiting." I left Cannon Beach the next day. Thomas Carlton transferred to work in the interior of the state. I heard he refused to go near the coast, even for visits. He settled in Bend, working at a sawmill far from the sea. Jim McCreary gave up carpentry. The last I heard, he bought a farm somewhere in the Willamette Valley, raises sheep, and no longer touches wood. Young Will Harrison was sent to relatives in California. His father later told me that the boy spent 3 months in a state of nervous exhaustion, waking up screaming, afraid of the fog. He gradually recovered but never returned to Oregon. Peter Swenson left Cannon Beach a month after the events. No one knows where he went. His house is still empty. Bob Turner continued to work for the company for another 2 years. Then I heard the news. He had committed suicide. He hanged himself in his room. His suicide note contained a single line. "The man in the shroud comes to me every night. I can't take it anymore." Andrew Holmes was buried in Cannon Beach Cemetery. I went to the funeral. The coffin was sealed. No one saw the body. There were about 10 people at the funeral. A few locals, us from the team, the priest. A short service. They lowered the coffin into the ground. Everyone left. I handed in my resignation from Oregon Timber and Mill Company a week after the funeral. Management accepted it without question. I moved to Portland and found a job at an architectural firm, far from the forest, the sawmills, and the coast. The project to build a new mill was shut down. Officially, it was because of geological instability. In reality, no one wanted to work there. Rumors spread despite the company's silence. Local workers refused to go to the old Hanson mill. They said that in the fall, on foggy nights, you could hear shuffling, wet breathing, and the clanging of metal. They said that every autumn, fresh bloody bandages appeared on the beams of the mill, even though the building had long been abandoned and no one went there. I found a record in the company archives of an accident in 1886. Ole Hansen, the owner of a mill on the North Coast, was caught in a circular saw on October 27th. The workers applied bandages to try to stop the bleeding, but the wound was too severe. He was taken to Portland on a cart, but he died on the way from blood loss. The body is wrapped in layers of gauze soaked in blood. He was buried in the local cemetery. The mill closed a year later. No one wanted to work there after Ole's death. It was his forest, his dream, his life, and he couldn't let go. I built a life in Portland. I got married 3 years later. We had 2 children. I worked as an architect, designing buildings, living a normal life. I almost forgot. But sometimes, on foggy October nights, I wake up in a cold sweat. I smell cedar sawdust mixed with carbolic acid. I hear the shuffling of bare feet on stones, the wet gurgling of breathing. And I know I saw what I saw. I know the wrapped man is real. I know that there, on the edge of the cliff between Cannon Beach and Arch Cape, among the ruins of the old Hanson Mill, he still wanders in the fog. 30 years have passed since that autumn of 1891. My children have grown up. My wife has aged, as have I. I am 54. Gray hair, wrinkles on my face, a life lived far from the coast in the safety of the city. But the memory won't let go. Sometimes I read the newspapers, reports of accidents on the northern coast of Oregon. Loggers lost in the fog, workers found dead at the base of cliffs, their necks broken, their bodies strangely wrapped. They write it off as falls, as accidents. But I know that the wrapped man waits. He waits for those who come to take his forest. He waits to wrap them in shrouds as he was once wrapped. Some wounds are too deep to heal. Some deaths are too unjust to accept. And some ghosts never go away. They just wait in the fog, shuffling their bare feet over the stones, dragging behind them the tools they once worked with, shrouded in their own death, steeped in pain, anger, and rejection. Ole Hansen built a dream. He gave 10 years of his life to this forest. He died before completing his work, and now he protects what he considers his own. Forever, relentlessly. I have never been back to the North Coast. I avoid it like a cursed place. When the company offered me projects there, I refused, making up excuses. But sometimes, on foggy October nights, when the wind howls outside the window and the rain drums on the roof, I close my eyes and see. I see a tall figure wrapped in bloody bandages, standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into the fog, waiting, always waiting. And I know the bandaged one is still there, among the ruins of the mill, among the cedars and fir trees, among the fog and the surf, waiting for someone to come and take his forest again.